Welcome to the Mark Steyn Show. Donald J. Trump has put waterboarding back on the table and wants to put America's enemies back on the waterboarding table. He says we have to fight fire with fire. ISIS likes to chop people's heads off, likes to burn people alive, and yet when we catch prominent jihadists, all we do is afford them every protection of the United States Constitution, watch them lawyer up and settle in for a 15-year legal battle. He has decided that we need to get tough, and that is the subject of our show tonight. We are going to discuss those issues with a guy who knows more about it than almost anybody on the planet. More than a decade and a half after 9/11, the mastermind of that murderous attack on the US mainland, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, sits in rather comfortable accommodations at American taxpayer expense in Guantanamo Bay. Apparently it now takes 4 times the length of the First World War just to bring one war criminal to trial, never mind hang him. In the 14 years since KSM, as they call him, was captured in Rawalpindi, my guest got to know him better than anyone else in the Western world. And he's now written a fascinating book on how he got to know him and other high-value Islamic terrorists. The book is titled Enhanced Interrogation, and the man who wrote it is the enhanced interrogator of the Bush years, James E. Mitchell. James, it's great to have you with us, and this is a fascinating book. Just to get your profession right from the word go. You didn't start out as a spook rappelling into presidential palaces in the small hours or anything. You're essentially a psychologist, is that correct?
Well, I started off on the bomb squad. I started off as and I got interested in how terrorists think while I was on the bomb squad, and I got out of the military and went and got a PhD in psychology, and then, you know, got caught up in the war after 9/11.
Right, but as you say, as a psychologist, you're interested in how these guys think and what you can do to impact them psychologically. You have a little, so you draw on stuff that's not necessarily from war or anything. You've got a little aside in the book in which you reveal that at a critical moment you pulled up some anecdote you'd heard about Sir Ernest Shackleton, the great Antarctic explorer.
Yeah, that was when Jose Padilla, the FBI, an FBI agent, and I were trying to get Abu Zubaydah to give up the information that he had about this person that we knew that he had handed off to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man who was behind the attacks on 9/11, and he needed to sleep a little bit, but we didn't want him to sleep too long because we didn't want him to get too comfortable. So I remembered a story from Ernest Shackleton where Ernest Shackleton's crossing South Georgia Island and his men are exhausted and they can't go any further and they're demanding some sleep, so he knows they can't tell time because nobody has a watch there. And so he allows them to sleep 5 minutes, tells them they've slept a half an hour, and then they go on to be rescued.
Right.
And we used that same technique on Abu Zubaydah, where the FBI agent who was involved masterfully got him to pray to Ishtihar, which is an Islamic prayer asking Allah for guidance that he provides during his sleep.
Well, you mentioned that this took on another level for you after September 11th, but your interest in Islam goes back before that. One of your closest friends was murdered.
Right, Hutchins was killed killed oddly enough by Kashmiri separatists who were working for the same spiritual leader, Sheikh Omar, or Omar Sheikh, depending on which way they pronounce his name, that captured Daniel Pearl and turned him over. Same group.
But this is like years before. This is 1995, I think?
Yeah, 1995, yes.
So by the time September 11th happened, you'd already, essentially for personal motivation, had a certain insight into the mindset.
Yeah, I was interested in, because Don was the most gentle man I know. He was an ice climber buddy of mine and a mountaineering friend. He was a psychologist, but he was the most gentle person on the planet. I mean, compared to him, I'm Hannibal Lecter, you know. He's just the nicest man on the planet. And why they would, well, they killed him and all the other Western men they had at the same time.
Right, right.
Yeah, so I got interested in it, in Islam.
Well, as you say, you, compared to him, you're Hannibal Lecter. To a lot of people on the American left, you actually are Hannibal.
That's a possibility. And you know, I know there are people who criticize me for being unrepentant for the things that we did, but I don't think I need to be ashamed of saving American lives. No,
no. And this occurred right after 9/11, essentially in the half decade following 9/11.
Yeah. What happened is 9/11 happened, and there was all of this intel about another wave of catastrophic attacks that were going to occur. And the CIA knew for a fact that Osama bin Laden had met with the Pakistanis who were passing out nuclear technology, and the Pakistani scientist he was talking to said to him, you know, the hard part is getting the fissionable material, and Osama bin Laden said, what if we've already got it? Right. And that sent chills throughout the administration, and the president essentially ordered the CIA to do anything and everything that was legal to stop this attack that they kept hearing about, because they could not risk the notion that somebody was going to set off a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, just hold it there for a moment, James, because my sense is that the vast majority of the American people have no idea about that. But this was taken as read at the highest levels of the Bush administration, that there was credible intelligence that after 9/11, in which 3,000 people died, there was going to be some kind of nuclear attack on an American city.
There was the potential for that, and that attack was being orchestrated by the person who had just successfully pulled off the 9/11. And in fact, we know now, because of the Enhanced Interrogation program, that the man who was working for KSM to do that, a man by the name of Mbali, had people already in training who were Asian instead of Arab, because they knew we'd be looking for him. He was training the muscle, because he knew now that I tear up when I think about Flight 93.
Right.
Anyway, they were training the muscle because they knew they were going to have to fight the passengers. And they were training the pilots to fly planes into the buildings, the tallest buildings in Los Angeles, Seattle, and Chicago. And that was already in the works. And in addition to that, KSM had people on the ground in the United States to do these harassing attacks to keep us busy until those guys could pull off that catastrophic attack.
Right.
And what KSM told me, and Dr. Jessen, when we asked him long after EITs were over, we asked him, what were you thinking? Yeah. You know, because it's, you know, like you might ask a kid who had a frat party at your house while you were gone, what were you thinking when you knocked down those buildings? What did you think Americans were going to do? Yeah. And he said, we thought you would do what you always do. We thought you would turn tail and run. You know, all of those Marines were killed in Beirut. Reagan turned tail and ran. The embassy bombings happened in 1998 in Nairobi and Tanzania, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Yeah. Clinton turned it over to the FBI. You guys turned tail and ran. The USS Cole happens in 2000. You turn it over to the FBI. You turn tail and run. So I thought what was going to happen was that President Bush would do, well, he called him that cowboy. That cowboy yeah. would do what all the other presidents had done. He would turn tail and run. He'd turn it over to the FBI, and we would have time to get this other catastrophic attack off. He said, but how was I supposed to know that cowboy would want us dead or alive and invade Afghanistan to get us? And he made clear to me that if Bush had handled that attack by turning it over to the FBI and making it a law enforcement matter, that they would have actually been able to pull that attack off.
Yeah, because essentially then we would have been in the situation we're in with a lot of things now, where
With
it's
Benghazi.
where it just becomes a 6, 7, 9-year investigation.
Exactly.
But that again, it seems you mentioned the USS Cole. I think it was Bill Cohen, the defense secretary in the Clinton administration, said at the time it didn't rise to the level. Sufficient level of provocation to warrant a response. In other words, you'll have to do more than that to catch our eye. And doesn't this get to the heart of
Precisely.
American strategy?
Precisely.
Because in the Cold War, it's all predicated on deterrence. A bunch of guys sitting in caves in Afghanistan are planning something against a nuclear power, and they have no fear that there will be any response.
Well, here's what KSM told me. KSM told me that we base what we're going to do on what you guys have done the past few years, right? I mean, he literally made it sound to me like Bush wasn't playing fair. He wasn't following the script. It should be a law enforcement issue. I mean, we're having this argument about whether it should be law enforcement or declaring war, you know? And so you just have to think about the way that we've handled these terror attacks over the last 8 years to ask yourself what those guys are thinking now.
Right.
You know, they're doing precisely what you said. They're making judgments about how vulnerable we are to attack based entirely on our policy for responding to these attacks.
Well, let's talk about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Most people haven't seen a photograph of him since he was captured in Rawalpindi, where I think he was in his nightshirt with an impressively hirsute back, like sticking out.
Right.
And actually, you have a rather poetic description of him shedding finger-length hairs like a cat in the book.
He's the hairiest man I've ever seen in my life.
The hairiest guy you've ever seen. And he is this, I guess, this strange hobbit-like creature. He's not physically impressive.
No, well, he's lost a lot of weight. He liked insurer, right? And because he's a Sufi, he liked fasting during the day. And so once the 3 weeks of harsh interrogations were over, the CIA fed him what he wanted to be fed and gave him the opportunity to pray and fast during the day because he was providing us with information at that point, and there was no reason to disrupt that. And so he had dropped a lot of weight. Now he looks like Yoda. If you see the pictures of him that are coming out of Guantanamo, he's in full dress, full Arab dress, and he's got a long beard, and he looks like a Sufi.
Right. And you first met him very shortly after he was captured.
March of 2003. Yeah, shortly, probably less than 2 weeks after he was captured.
Now again, to go back to the sort of Hannibal Lecter side of things,
my attorneys won't be pleased that I said that.
But you're associated with all the bad words
Right.
from the Bush years: enhanced interrogation, waterboarding, rendition, black sites. And rendition and black sites came into play with KSM in the early years.
They did. Rendition actually was started under Clinton, and it may have existed before that. The black sites that are referred to in the book and the CIA refers to are individual sites that were set up around the world. We can't talk about the locations of those, to specifically hold high-value detainees. Some of them for medium and low-value detainees, but I never had anything to do with those guys.
But this is basically where the interrogation takes place, not on U.S. soil, because in a sense, you have a freer hand there.
In the sense that if we stay within the guidelines provided by the Justice Department, you have a freer hand. Or you had a freer hand, you don't anymore. I mean, now the mall cop has more choices about what interrogation techniques to use than the CIA.
Yeah, no.
But in terms of, KSM was an excellent example of that for people who haven't followed it very closely. He was caught, and when he was caught, they spent several days with him just trying to debrief him using what they called tea and respectful conversation, which is actually what General Mattis was saying would work. But it didn't work at all on him. He rocked and he prayed and he basically told them to pound sand.
Yeah, just stay on that for a moment, James, because it's you refer to it rather dismissively, I think, as tea and biscuits, biscuits in the English sense,
yeah, cookies,
rather than the American. And in Pakistan, where they like their tea and biscuits, and Americans are dressing up in traditional Pakistani robes and going in and doing the salam and the tea and biscuits.
And what KSM told me later was that those men were clowns.
Right.
He said, what made those people think for an instant that I would betray my God for a handful of dates?
Right.
Well, I don't believe anyone at his level would, right? No one at his level. He's in a different level than an ordinary jihadist who is forced to take up arms because ISIS came into his village and you either fight for them or you die. That's a different person. The man who gets up every day and tries to work out new and more clever ways to kill Americans, that guy is not going to give it up, and he didn't give it up for that.
You say you're interested in how these guys think. If you were to make a broad generalization about what the West has done wrong since 9/11, it's that we assume that in the end they like us. So
well, we assume it's important for them to like us, and that if they only liked us, if they only understood that we want to live in peace with them, then everything would be okay. But it's actually the opposite. What KSM told me was that our judicial system, our Bill of Rights, our civil liberties, our desire to have other people in the world like us were all weapons that Allah had placed in our minds so that we could be defeated by the Islamists who had the true dominion of the world.
Right. So when they don't think of Western liberty as something they aspire to.
Oh, no.
They think of it as a fatal weakness, which is why they'll win.
Well, they believe that they've been asked or demanded, actually compelled by Allah, to purge the world of. I asked him one time, why do you guys call this the religion of peace when all I ever see you do is killing people and blowing people up? And he said, we are the religion of peace. The world will be at peace when there is a Muslim caliphate in charge of the entire world and everyone has either been converted, killed, or enslaved. Right. So we're spreading peace.
Right.
We are the religion of peace. Not the way we think about it. And so you have people on TV in the United States who are trying to ratchet up the use of Sharia law in the United States, who continue to claim that Islam is a religion of peace. And they're telling the truth, but not from our perspective.
No. There will be peace when there is no longer any opposition to them.
KSM told me that Western democracy and true Islam or Sharia cannot coexist because we foolishly believe that we have some say in what our laws should be and how we should dress. And we can change those things. We think we get a vote in how we live our lives, but that's not true. How we're supposed to live our lives is in the Quran and in the perfect words and deeds of the Prophet. And so we should be living by analogy to what he did, not coming up with new ways of living that please us.
Right. In the book, the moment when, if you like, the difference between our thinking and theirs becomes starkest, to me, is the moment when he confesses to beheading Daniel Pearl, the kidnapped Wall Street Journal journalist. And that was something that came out in the course of the interrogation. But at some point, he's asked whether it was difficult for him.
Right.
And by which I take it you meant whether it was emotionally difficult to saw another guy's head off.
Right.
But his answer...
He said, oh no, I had sharp knives. He said occasionally had to stop and, sharpen it. But we had many sharp knives. It was easy. Getting through the neck bone was the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, he said it just like that.
Yeah.
And it was the creepiest thing I think I have ever heard. And I've dealt with some pretty creepy people. But it was the creepiest thing I think I'd ever heard. And, you know, he was being debriefed by a weapons of mass destruction expert, because they're still trying to find that supposed nuclear material. Interrogations for him were over months before, and he just wanted to talk about killing Pearl.
Right, right. And isn't that, though, the difference? That at a certain... You have done things that a lot of people couldn't do, but in the end, were you to be asked to saw another guy's head off? Yeah. The issue of whether the knives are blunt or sharpened is not what makes it difficult or easy, is it?
No. Here's what Americans, I think, don't know. When they kill people, it's an act of worship. One of the things that became clear to me when I was talking with these guys is that one way they show their love for Allah, and one way they show how powerful Allah is by slaughtering people who are helpless to prevent it. So when they cut the throat of a Yazidi sex slave and she bleeds out in a bowl, that's actually an act of worship. It's not an act of aggression. You know, when they crucify children or burn people in cages, or in KSM's case, when he decapitated Daniel Pearl and then dismembered cut his arms and legs off and stacked him in a hole, that was not an act of anger. It was an act of love for his God. And he feels as though he shows his God how powerful his God is by how helpless innocent people are to prevent their destruction.
But you say innocent people. They don't really qualify for that category in the minds of KSM. They're not people. Close. They're entirely, he doesn't, Daniel Pearl thought these guys were friends. He thought he'd made a connection with them. He thought he had a human relationship with them.
Sheikh Omar, or Omar Sheikh, I get them confused.
Yeah.
was the same person who was behind the death of my friend Don Hutchins, right? So years later, he arranges the kidnapping of Daniel Pearl, and this is how the system kind of comes back around, you know, the karma of the whole thing. But you're right. Once they found out he was Jewish, they were just ordered to kill him. They believe that they are chosen by their God to purge the world of all of the infidels and all of the apostates, which means any other Muslim that doesn't think exactly the way they think. Yeah. You know, and that whole crew is not going to go away because we want them to like us.
No.
And it's not going to go away because you close Guantanamo. You know, I had a conversation with him about Guantanamo. I don't talk about it in the book, but he told me, he said, it's just something that we use to recruit people. If it wasn't Guantanamo, it would be something else. It would be using the Straits of Hormuz to get oil, or leaving American infidels in the Arabian Peninsula, or having people in the Holy Land who are infidels that don't belong there. The point that he made is he has to have something to stir up the youth.
Right. President Bush used a line that I always thought, to me, that I always thought should have been a bumper sticker, because he took the same view as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. If it's not Gitmo, it'll be something else. He said to me, this was at the time of the Danish Mohammed cartoons, and he goes, if it's not the cartoons, it's the Crusades, which gets the sort of lack of proportion. It can be the most trivial thing, or it can be some massive geopolitical thing.
It's funny that you would say that, because that's precisely what KSM said to me. He said, in essence, well, we're still mad at you guys because of the Crusade. Right. He said exactly what you just said in the context of that conversation. And what that points out to is that at any point that they can't exercise their dominion, you become their enemy. Right. And until you either, you pay the head tax and become subservient, or convert, or they kill you, their job's not done. They're not going to go away.
I want to ask you about a phrase that occurs when people are asked to justify enhanced interrogation, waterboarding, this kind of thing. People talk about the ticking time bomb scenario. You're trying to get information on something that could occur. you don't know when, but the bomb is ticking, and you need. And people talk about actionable intelligence.
Right.
What you can get from these guys about what some guy in Lahore may be liaising with some guy in Kandahar over some Muslim engineering student who's studying in Virginia to do somewhere in San Bernardino or whatever. Right. And people are very focused on that. But what happens to the insights that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others say to you about their broader motivations? How far up the chain, when he says that to you in a room, how far up the chain does that go?
I would have to say it depends. One of the things the CIA hired me to do after 2003 was to do lectures to foreign liaison intelligence services on what they think. So to some extent it did go up, but whether it goes up to the decision makers like the President or the Secretary of Defense or the director of the CIA, I had no idea. My feeling is that for some folks it gets lost. But on the operational side, down where you actually have to go help some other liaison service and intelligence requirements that will, that you can use, those people we were made available to share these insights. But we were not made available to our own leaders to share these insights, and they have yet to ask about them, to be honest.
So you're saying that you might find yourself in a room with a couple of guys from a foreign intelligence service saying
not a couple of guys, a classroom.
Yeah, but that there are a whole bunch of congressmen and senators and cabinet officers who never hear this stuff.
Would be surprised if they had. No. I would be surprised because I certainly have never talked to them about it. And I worked for the Special Mission Department, and the Special Mission Department would give me tasks. So they would say, for example, we want you to go meet with these liaison folks, and we would like you to talk to them about the things you've learned about the people that we're holding. Right. And so I would put together something, they would approve it, and then I would go out and deliver it. But that, to my knowledge, didn't go up. Right. So it's entirely possible that a number of people are making decisions about foreign policy without really understanding the way they think, which is what I believe is going on.
Yeah, because you do get the sense almost that it's a conscious decision not to see the forest for the trees.
It's political correctness. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other senior terrorists, the Islamists, I'm sure would see political correctness as a force multiplier and a cloaking device. Because what that does is that allows them to operate in the open and ratchet up Sharia without being challenged. Because every time you challenge or you push back, there's this made-up Islamophobia word that gets tossed out. I'm a psychologist. I know what a phobia is, right? There's no Islamophobia. That's something made up by the Muslim Brotherhood to be able to keep people from saying what is actually occurring. It's not Islamophobic to not want an Islamist organization to build a mosque at ground zero. That's not Islamophobia. That's good judgment. And so I think what happens is our political correctness makes it possible for them to, well, our own President Obama said more people die in bathtubs than from terror attacks. And the key difference in my mind, and I could be wrong about this, is bathtubs don't get up every morning and try to figure out some way to set off a nuke in New York. And so he's thinking short term, they're thinking long term. Trust me, every day, some terrorist in some place in the Middle East is getting up and trying to figure out a better way to disseminate a poison. They're trying to figure out a better way to set off a radiological bomb. They're trying to figure out some way to get killers into our country. And if we compare that conscious effort to do that with a bathtub, then we're blinding ourselves to what is going to be the obvious ratcheting up of this stuff.
Right, which is, in the end, almost suicidal.
It is suicidal.
Civilizational.
Germany is committing cultural suicide. Yeah. We've forgiven them for World War II. You don't have to kill your culture by bringing all these Islamists in. Don't do it.
But what's fascinating about that is that in the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he was captured about 18 months after 9/11. Since when he's had a fairly restricted access to news and that kind of thing.
We don't know what's happening with his lawyers. You know, his lawyers smuggled pictures of me and other people into his
yeah,
cell.
which I'm going to come back to, because that's actually that too is a disgraceful and revealing insight. But just to stick on this Islamophobia point, I mean, as you say, you're a psychologist. You know what a phobia is. It's actually quite a sophisticated form of baloney for them to peddle so effectively.
Exactly.
Because they've made people scared, as in the San Bernardino case, or his neighbors see all this stuff.
And that's the point of it. The absolute point of it is to control our behavior. And one of the reasons we're seeing such an increase, I think, in lone wolves, and I haven't asked him about this specific thing, but I'm pretty sure KSM would agree. One of the reasons that we're seeing such an increase in these lone wolf attacks is because we've been trying to treat them as a problem of everyday living. We are trying to figure out some way to exist with them in our midst instead of finding them, killing them, questioning them, kicking them out of the country, or whatever it is that we need to do. And you cannot allow political correctness to control your monitoring of the threats in such a way that you allow these threats to become viable in your midst simply because you're looking the other way and not paying attention.
Well, the French Prime Minister said after the Nice truck bomb, he said, we basically just have to get used to it. This is the way it is. And that was what was rather sad for me about reading your book. I don't know the precise moment when the post-9/11 era became the past, became the day before yesterday. Broadly speaking, I think it had something to do with the inauguration of President Obama. But when you look at what you did in those first years after 9/11, the 8 years of the Bush administration, at that point, you were interviewing very relatively sophisticated, high-level terrorists plotting sophisticated schemes.
Exactly.
Now we have a guy who gets into a truck and kills 12 people at a German Christmas market. Right. We have a guy who goes to a nightclub in Orlando and guns down 49 people. In a sense, the whole not seeing the forest for the trees thing, there are a lot more trees now than there were back when you were first questioned KSM.
Here's what I think, and this is maybe a horrible analogy, but it's an analogy I'm going to use. We're right at the beginning stages of what amounts to a zombie apocalypse. We see a few zombies breaking out here and there, but we're not doing what we need to do to fix it. We're not doing what we need to do to stop this. 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 50 years down the road, it's going to look more like World War Z than it looks now. We're going to look more like Europe. There's going to be, if we don't do something, and I'm hopeful that the new president-elect will, the United States is going to have no-go zones. We're going to have Sharia courts for handling civil matters. We're going to have the self-imposition of blasphemy laws and Sharia law that cuts into our freedom of speech and cuts into our freedom of choice. We have to stop that here. We have to stop it. It's already gone so far in Europe that they're going to have to do things that seem more brutal and more draconian than they would have had to do had they stopped it in the beginning, had they been a little more careful about who they let in.
Yeah. I mean, that's what is the interesting insight that comes late in the book. And it's fascinating me because I wound up getting taken to 3 human rights commissions up in Canada because I accurately quoted a Norwegian imam openly saying what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed told you. He said, we're not going to win this thing by terrorist acts, by flying planes into skyscrapers.
Because we can't defeat you that way.
No.
We can't defeat your military. The target is the mind of the Americans. It's the mind of the American people. And what we're going to do is we're going to outbreed you, and we're going to immigrate into your Western democracies. He said the United States. We're going to immigrate into America. We're going to wrap ourselves in your civil liberties while you ratchet up while we ratchet up Sharia. We're going to feed ourselves off of your social welfare system, and when the time is right, we're going to rise up and we're going to impose it from within.
And again, that's a great strategic insight, that ultimately, as he sees it, they won't need to fly planes into skyscrapers.
It's nice if you can do that.
It's good because it can accelerate the process. But you don't need to do it because in the end, the free world will hand you the keys to those skyscrapers themselves.
What he thinks is that our civil liberties are gifts from Allah. They're weapons that have been placed in our minds so they can be defeated. And I know I said that before, but the thing you need to know is they absolutely believe that, and that's the philosophy that drives what they do.
Right.
They think that closing Gitmo, a gift.
Yeah.
It's a weapon. It's a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of strength. It's not a sign of tolerance. Tolerance is a weakness. Those 19 people that Obama is thinking about letting go, poison experts, chemical weapon experts, bomb builders, people who have been involved in multiple attacks killing Americans. Half of them are from Yemen. Are you going to drop all of these people into a failed state that's in the middle of a civil war and expect them to be able to monitor them? No, those guys will be back on the battlefield.
No, and these are the guys we caught.
Right.
And we told our enemies we don't even have the will to deal with the guys we captured.
Well, that's what he said. You don't have he said, we're going to win because you don't have the stomach to do what you need to do in order to prevent us from winning. You don't have the resolve. You got a lot of military power, but you're weak.
Right. And let me just go back to that point I made about how far this gets referred up. Do you think that when President Obama or President Trump, let's be bipartisan about this, when they gather their cabinet round the table, how many of them do you think know Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's insights there and have the least idea of how to respond to them?
Well, I think the new candidate to be director of the CIA does, because I know he read my book. So at least one.
That's
of them,
good.
At least
That's
one
a
of
good
them
start.
does.
Yeah.
Whether the others do or not, I have no idea. They seem to be more interested in having the progressives in other countries like us and approve of what we do than protecting Americans.
Right.
You had asked me an interesting question, and then we kind of moved on. You had said, I don't know when it became day before yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, you know, immediately after 9/11, I was working for the CIA, and I attended a variety of conferences for them. And one of the conferences I attended, there were two kinds of conversations that were taking place. Conversation number one is, how do we frame this in such a way that we don't make the Americans mad at the Muslims? Right. And you had people from various networks and people from various think tanks going, okay, we don't show pictures of 9/11. We play down the. I mean, if you look at the way the news was played out immediately after that, it was. I won't say it was a concerted effort, but there was a considerable amount of thought in shaping how Americans thought about the people who had perpetrated the attacks.
Yeah, that's very important. I mean, for the first 24, 36 hours, there were scenes, for example, I think it was in Ramallah, where they were passing out candy in the street, and everyone was joyous and celebrating this vast mountain of corpses. And then suddenly that footage vanished from the TV screen.
So did the footage of the building burning.
Yeah.
So did the footage. And that was one of the things they thought we needed to do to not remind people of this horrific attack, because they wanted us to just move on.
Yeah.
The other thing that people were saying, that you had said, was that it was just an ordinary part of life, that we just needed to live with it. You know, that I think President Obama had said that Al-Qaeda and ISIS doesn't represent an existential threat to the American government. Well, you know, hell, 9/11 didn't represent an existential threat to the American government. But the point is not to stack up the bodies of dead Americans in front of the White House so the folks in Washington, D.C. can continue with their life. The point of the government is to protect ordinary Americans. And it's wrong, I think, for us to expect our citizens to adjust to this barbarism. You know, there's a bombing at a baseball stadium.
Yeah.
We treat it like a law enforcement problem. You know, there's 100 a few dead, or another, you know, bar is shot up, or somebody drives a truck over a bunch of people who are celebrating Christmas, and it's a law enforcement issue. We're just going to go on because not many of us die.
There's a funny thing about that. In the 70s, at the height of the what they call the Irish Troubles.
That's when I learned to be a bomb guy.
Euphemistically, but the the Home Office in London used to talk. Civil servants used to talk about holding it to a quote acceptable level of violence.
Exactly.
And cynical civil servants could talk like that in private, but if politicians talked like that, they would have been rendered electorally non-viable. Now the politicians tell us we should get used to being blown up. And
we should get used to it. You know, we should change our behavior. The women should change the way they dress.
Yeah.
We should not do anything to insult the Prophet Muhammad. You know, you can insult any other religion you want. You can do blasphemous things to, you know, any sort of Christian iconology that you want to do to, but you can't even draw a picture of Muhammad for fear that people are going to go crazy. This is a point that I think that a philosopher, a psychologist named Sam Harris made.
Right.
The point that he made, I think, was that if the so-called moderate Muslims are hanging on by their fingernails, and the only thing keeping them from becoming jihadists is whether or not we draw a picture of Muhammad, then we've got a much larger problem than we think we do. And that's the problem that we should be addressing.
Well, you mentioned, again, just to go back to when did 9/11, the 9/11 era become the day before yesterday? For you personally, and I would imagine it motivates a lot of what you said in the book, but for you personally, the 21st century divides into two 8-year periods. During the Bush administration, you were the good guy chasing down the bad guys. During the Obama years, you became the bad guy and they were chasing you down. You were caught in this almost immediately. The new president took office.
The day he took office.
Yeah.
The day he took office, he essentially fired us. You know, the CIA said, well, it was for the convenience of the government, but in fact, he shut the program down. There was even talk of leaving our people in war zones to find their own way home until the people at the CIA said, that's not going to happen. You know, we just don't abandon Americans in foreign war zones. And
but because it would be more convenient if they just disappeared. And
no, well, I don't think he meant to kill them. I think he meant to deny financial support, right? So they were just canceling the contract, and they wanted to do it immediately. But there are federal laws about handling contracts, right? And so we did. You know, even though that the EITs had been approved by President Bush, briefed to the National Security Council, approved at least 5 times as being legal and not violating any treaties and being consistent with the Constitution. One time after I personally waterboarded an assistant attorney general, to which I would say, how many attorney generals do you have to waterboard to get a straight answer, right? The Democrats on the Senate Select Committee cherry-picked that information, framed it like a prosecutorial brief, and smeared all the men and women, myself included, but mainly the other men and women who had been keeping them safe all those years. We did not have these attacks during the Bush years.
No.
It was when we started dialing back our surveillance and we started dialing back how we interacted with the terrorists that these attacks started occurring and started, you know, happening again.
But let me bring it back to you personally. When I visited Gitmo, the guys running the joint said one of the problems they'd had there was that the very eminent legal representation that the detainees have, there was a concerted effort to identify people working at the camp and actually find out their names and intimidate their family members and all the rest of it. And the one guard told me, he said the biggest chill was when one of the prisoners looked at him and said he knew his wife and children's names. You were exposed to that. The lawyers for these guys...
They put it in their privileged bag so
Yeah.
they couldn't be searched.
Yeah.
And they smuggled the photos of me and several other people who were not even part of the interrogation program.
Right.
But some people who were still undercover smuggled those things into Guantanamo, gave them to KSM, gave them to, well, they showed them to all of those folks.
Right.
And that case has not been completely resolved. You know, it was just recently turned over to some small investigative outfit associated with the Navy.
Yeah.
And that case has not been resolved.
But you said earlier that leaving, if they'd left these guys out there on the fringes of the map, you said you didn't think they were trying to get them killed. But when a lawyer, knowing the disposition and the organization of these people, gives a photograph of you to hardcore jihadists, isn't the object to get you killed?
Well, I felt that way, you know, and I know the other people whose photographs showed up in that thing felt that way. Now, they claim that that's what a good lawyer would do to provide representation, and that's their defense. And the Obama Justice Department has sided with him. You got to remember that what the Obama Justice Department did was stack the Justice Department with lawyers who had been defending the jihadists before they did this investigation as to whether or not anyone had been tortured, which, by the way, no charges were filed against anyone.
But as you say, just so, because people have forgotten this, but basically in 2009, when they were looking to get rid of all the Bush-era lawyers at the Justice Department, they basically, the great qualification for getting a terrific gig at the United States Justice Department is if you had a Rolodex full of hardcore Islamic terrorists.
I had heard that the third highest position in the Justice Department was filled by one of those lawyers.
Yeah.
And they had people who were actually in charge of detainee matters who had previously either filed amicus briefs or had represented the detainees. But I don't know if you're interested in this. I'm currently being sued by 3 enemy combatants. One of them, I didn't know anything about these guys until they showed up on the lawsuit showed up. One of them was a member of Al-Qaeda in East Africa and participated in the bombing of 2 U.S. embassies. Right? That guy is suing me, and he can't get in the United States. He had the gall to ask my attorneys to go to Dar es Salaam, which is one of the cities where he participated in bombing the embassy. Right. The other guy runs ran a jihadist training camp, training jihadis to fight the Americans when we were trying to catch Al-Qaeda. And the last one is that Taliban enemy combatant that I describe in the book. That lawsuit is still currently going on.
I can understand. Again, I put it in the same category as KSM recognizing political correctness as a force multiplier. I can understand if you're some guy who's blown up a U.S. embassy in East Africa and then thinks, how can I get an even bigger bang for the buck? They're the most litigious society on earth. Let's drag somebody into court over that. I can understand that. But your book is particularly interesting to me on the actions of Senator Dianne Feinstein, a very senior Democrat from California, who publicly issued a dossier, a report, in which you're all given, all the relevant people are given pseudonyms. And then her staffers leaked to the media your real name. So never mind the penniless loser in Dar es Salaam. What's Senator Feinstein's motivation for that?
I think she wants to put salve on her moral conscience because, you know, this thing was briefed to the leaders of the committees that provide oversight to the CIA, and no one objected, and a number of them said, "Are you doing enough? Is this going to be rough enough? Is this going to be enough?" And then as soon as the attacks are under control and they don't happen, you know, they come back out and they posture for their constituents, and I think Well, even what Senator McCain had said. Senator McCain said, well, these things were a torture, they were illegal, they should always be illegal. And then somebody said, well, what if there's a ticking time bomb scenario or another potential catastrophic attack like 9/11? And then he said, we would expect the CIA interrogators to do what was right.
Yeah.
They would do what was necessary. And at their trial, if they had actually saved lives, we would try to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
You know, so they want to, as I said, they want to live under the protection, but they don't want to provide the people that they're asking.
So John McCain's idea is that if there is a ticking time bomb scenario and you manage to prevent the next 9/11, then you should just have a 15-year legal nightmare, and by the time it eventually comes to trial, you should enter that in mitigation, and maybe the sentence would be commuted from life to 14 years.
Precisely, something to that effect, yeah.
And that's the war hawk's view on how you fight war.
Yeah, well, I think my reaction to that was they have to be just putting salve on their own moral conscience, and I don't think Americans will tolerate that for long. You know, you get another attack like 9/11, and let people in America find out that you could have prevented that by, you know, asking questions in a way that the Justice Department had decided was legal. Because somewhere between waterboarding and worse and the Army Field Manual, there needs to be some kind of legal coercion, because these senior people are not going to give it up. You know. They just aren't going to give it up. And so you got to ask yourself, what's President-elect Trump going to do if he gets that kind of information? Is he going to be willing to stand by and say, well, we were constrained by the Army Field Manual, and, you know, we didn't give this any thought? You know?
No. You say it's going to take a second 9/11 or whatever, we get a second 9/11. I find that one of the saddest lines. When we began talking, Flight 93 flashed into your mind, and you began tearing up, and that happens to you quite a lot. In other words, these are real people to you. They went to the airport and they boarded a commuter flight. They went to work at a boring office in Lower Manhattan, and they never came home that day. And that's still, people can see it now. You still, the memory of that burns bright and vivid with you. And on that day when 3,000 people went to work and never came home, a lot of us thought that memory would be seared into the American consciousness for a generation. And in fact, you tear up. But to other people, it's just something that happened long ago to a bunch of strangers they didn't know.
Part of that, I think, has to do with the way that we, the media, tried to anesthetize people to what had actually happened. I tear up in part because, you know, when they originally asked me to help them with the enhanced interrogation thing, I didn't want to do it. But I did think back to 93 and specifically to the falling man. And
the falling man was the man in the World Trade Center who because of the heat in that building, he chose to die in the fresh air falling to earth.
As hundreds did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that happens to you as you get older is all your toughness turns into ear hair and tears. You know? What happened was, when I originally told Jose Padilla, I don't think I'm the guy. Yeah. You know, I'd gotten 90 days worth of intel briefs on Al Qaeda every day. You know, I just received a briefing on the potential nuclear threat, and somebody said, if you're not willing to do it, how can we ask somebody else? Because nobody knows the threat as well as you do in terms of who has the potential to do this sort of stuff. And I thought to the falling man, and I thought about the people on Flight 93. And And so I thought to myself, really, if they can give their lives, then I can give up my professional preciousness and my moral high stance, that moral high ground on this particular thing, because it's easy if you're not involved. I mean, I was a bomb guy. I've been in ticking bomb situations, and it was much worse than that. It was a lot worse than that. And for some people, the idea that you could save hundreds, maybe thousands of lives is hypothetical. But it wasn't hypothetical to the men and women in the CIA at that particular time, and it wasn't hypothetical to me or to Dr. Jessen.
But isn't that also the difference between you and the men you questioned? I mean, what makes Abu Zubaydah cry? What makes Khalid Sheikh Mohammed cry?
The only time I've seen Khalid Sheikh Mohammed cry was when he was sad because he didn't know the name of well, he didn't know whether it was a girl or a boy. His wife was pregnant when he was captured, and he wanted to know whether the child was born, and he wanted to know the child's name and sex. And I happened to be walking by the camera one day, and I see Bruce now. Bruce, who was engaged also in the Enhanced Interrogations. This is months later, maybe years later. Yeah, it's well over a year later. And he's holding Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, rocking him like a child. And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on in there? And so I stick my head in, and KSM's crying about his son. At the same time, KSM would tell you how Allah approves of him killing your son, because it gives you hope, and it's the reason that you fight Islam, and they'll eventually grow up to be a taxpayer that supports the military. But he's upset about that, so that's what makes him cry. The cry for, it's not because of the violence.
No, that has no impact.
I may have missed your point, but
No, I think it's not about the common humanity. It's a tribal pride in not knowing whether he has another son or what.
I think it's easy when it's not you to say, it's just an acceptable loss,
Right.
When you actually the person who has to make the decision, in my mind, what I did was I said, okay, I know these things have been done for 50 years safely against Americans. And if the Justice Department approves them, I know that they're legal, right? I know there's going to be a doctor there. I know there's going to be a psychologist there. Those people are going to be tasked specifically with preventing any severe or prolonged mental or physical harm, right? So I think we can do this thing. And then I said to myself, well, the temporary discomfort of a terrorist doesn't outweigh my moral obligation to save lives.
No.
It just doesn't. Especially when the terrorist voluntarily decided to try to kill us. And they voluntarily decided to try to withhold information so more people could kill us.
Yeah.
It's not like they have, now remember, these are enemy combatants, they're not U.S. citizens. It's not like they have the constitutional right to remain silent, or that their right to remain silent somehow supersedes your right to stay alive.
Well, that's an interesting legal point, because the lawyer's view is that essentially all 7 billion people on the planet have the right to remain silent if you want to question them, isn't it?
They not only have the right to remain silent, they have the right to come into our country anytime they want to, and we have to support them.
Right. Let me ask you about, I guess, which is the big question, and on which President Trump can blow hot and cold. The question of waterboarding.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting in the book. You describe the ways in which KSM had sufficient mental focus to withstand waterboarding, including to the point where he kind of knew how long it would last, and he could kind of count it out along with it.
He didn't kind of count it out. He counted it out, and he would do this when it was time to stop.
Right.
It didn't take him long to figure out that we waterboarded him on an average of about 8 seconds in terms of pouring water. We poured water on an average of about 8 seconds, and if you were allowed to do 2 20 seconds and 1 40 seconds. Well, at least that's what we would do. The Justice Department would allow you to do a lot more than that, but we thought that was wrong. And so he would figure out, he could keep track of it like a guy counts cards.
Yeah.
he could keep track of it. And he had some sort of thing he could do with his nose and mouth where he could just pass the water out.
Yeah, he took the water in through his nostrils and then
spit it out his
it.
mouth in some sort of strange way. So he's the only person I've ever heard of in my entire career dealing with this. I mean, they called the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency, the CIA did before when they were putting together the documents, when they were doing due diligence about this list that I gave them and recommended that they consider. And the guy at the JPRA had said, it's absolutely convincing. It's 100% convincing. Everyone that we've used it on capitulates.
Yeah.
Well, 2 of the detainees that we used it on did capitulate. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed didn't.
So, and that's one of the things that makes him, in your words, the supervillain.
He's a comic book supervillain.
Yeah.
I think, see, let me tell you another thing that he thinks. We're talking about the minds and motives. He told me, because I helped get them ready to be rendered to Guantanamo from where he was at. He told me that he was ready to martyr himself. He was ready, and he was going to plead guilty. And he did plead guilty. President Obama and his Justice Department set that confession aside because they wanted to take a victory lap in New York, and they wanted to make it about them instead of about justice for the American people, right? What that little homunculus thought when he did that was, this is a sign from Allah that I'm to carry out my jihad in the court system. Right. I'm to make it as slow and as painful. Like he just, this morning I read that he's written a letter to Barack Obama, and it's being delivered to him, right? And what he wants to do is he wants to use his trial now as a beacon to bring like-minded jihadis in, whereas before he was just willing to accept his fate. And now he's not.
Yeah, they're good. They adapt. They use whatever weapons are to hand, whether it's a truck in Nice or the Byzantine legal machinations of New York.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is precisely it.
Let me just ask you about the way your book begins, with a very vivid account of a credible ISIS threat against you and your family. And so suddenly, as you say, you've got the whiff of gun oil in your bedroom and people swarming all over your house and everything. When you look at the last 8 years, you've sacrificed an enormous amount personally in order to be able to serve your country by bringing your area of expertise to bear on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other high-value terrorists. And in return, your country at the highest level, from the Federal Justice Department to prominent United States senators, to all kinds of just general low-level activists on the pro-terrorist left, have made your life a hell, whether in the legal sense or, as in chapter 1 of your book, actually in terms of how you live and whether it's safe to draw the curtains.
Yeah, not just my life, Dr. Jessen's life as well.
Right.
I talk about him in the book.
You know, when I had nothing on the same scale when I mentioned these court cases up in Canada, but it made me, and I have never thought about my country in quite the same way again. And I wonder if for you, there isn't a certain amount of bitterness at what happened in the post-Bush, the Obama years.
Well, I understood why the liberals did it, right? And I was willing to brush that off. I don't understand why the Justice Department continues to slow roll the release of documents that I can use to defend myself and to intimidate the people who could be witnesses into not testifying.
Right.
That's happened currently. So I can live with the idea that Feinstein's unhappy with me, right? I have a harder time living with the notion that this trial continues. Right. That twice, the Department of Justice senior attorney has testified in motions in front of the court that Dr. Jessen and Dr. Mitchell had nothing whatsoever to do with the capture, detention, interrogation, or rendition of Salim or bin Saud, and this case continues. I mean, how is it that we're being sued by terrorists who we never heard of
Right.
until the lawsuit showed up.
Right.
I mean, I can even understand why Gul Rahman, his nephew, might think he has a case, even though he doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? Because the thing that killed Gul Rahman was something that the Federal Bureau of Prisons taught these native guards who were guarding him.
Right.
Right? It wasn't something we had anything to do, and we were gone. We tried to get him we tried to get a medical care to the guy. So I do have some bitterness about it. I vacillate back and forth, you know. Somebody had asked me, would you do it again? And what I had said was, if I thought there was a credible, catastrophic attack and it was legal, yes, I'd leave today and go do it. Well, that's on the good days. On the bad days, I think, you brought this on yourself, right?
Yeah.
Guys like me ought to just stay home and let you work it out. You know, maybe Senator Feinstein can switch places with me, and the next time there's a catastrophic attack in the work, she can go ask him about it.
Yeah, she can be the one.
Who does it. I've said the same thing to reporters. I'll stay back here and criticize you. You go try to get the information that's necessary to save lives. You know, because it's easy when you're not involved, especially when you're looking back with 20/20 hindsight, to think about how much better you could have done it, or how much more clever you would be, or how you could do it with just talking, you know, or making the person like you with rapport.
Tea and biscuits.
Tea and biscuits, yeah. So I vacillate, but most of the time I realize it's not the Americans that are doing this, it's the political class.
Well, you're a tough guy, James Mitchell, and as impressive as it is, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being able to survive 8 seconds of waterboarding, to survive 8 years of the most powerful government on earth attempting to punish you for serving that government at an extremely high level for the previous 8 years. You have to be incredibly tough to be able to survive that. This is a magnificent book, folks, Enhanced Interrogation, Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. James Mitchell,
thank you, sir.
To have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you much.
Thank you. On tomorrow's show, McDonald's, Mary Tyler Moore, a little bit of James Bond, and the great Patsy Gallant sings Edith Piaf. And that all sounds a long way from James Mitchell and Enhanced Interrogation. But remember, all those things are things that America's enemies want to end. Civilization's enemies want to end. All tomorrow on The Mark Steyn Show.